The clouds darkened over Willow Creek, Texas, in a way that made even the bravest souls tremble, as the mid-afternoon sky turned an unnatural shade of green that old-timers recognized as nature's most sinister warning. Eleanor Patterson had just finished hanging laundry behind her modest home at the edge of town when she first heard the distant roar that would forever change her life. Eleanor glanced up at the menacing sky, her copper hair whipping across her face as the wind suddenly intensified. At 24, she had weathered many storms in her life, both literal and figurative, but something about this day felt different. The wind carried a strange energy, a foreboding whisper that made her shiver despite the warm May air of 1878. "Eleanor, get inside now." Mrs. Whittaker called from across the fence, her elderly neighbor already hustling toward her own cellar door. "That's a twister brewing if I ever saw one," Eleanor nodded, quickly gathering the remaining clothes that hadn't yet been pinned to the line. The distant roar grew louder, transforming from a low growl to a terrifying howl that seemed to swallow all other sounds. Her hands trembled as she dropped the laundry basket and turned toward her house. The cellar was her only hope now. The first debris flew past her as she reached her back door, small twigs and dust at first, then larger branches that clattered against the wooden walls of her home. Eleanor struggled against the strengthening wind, her cotton dress billowing around her legs as she fought her way inside. The windows rattled violently, threatening to shatter at any moment. She had barely made it through the kitchen when the first window gave way, exploding inward in a shower of glass that narrowly missed her. Eleanor screamed, covering her head with her arms as she lunged toward the trapdoor that led to the cellar. Her fingers had just grasped the iron ring when the deafening roar became all-encompassing, and the world around her erupted into chaos. The roof ripped away with a sound like the end of the world itself. Eleanor tried to hold onto the trapdoor handle, but the suction of the tornado was too powerful. She felt herself being lifted, her body weightless for a terrifying moment before something heavy and solid struck her from behind. Darkness claimed her as the tornado continued its merciless path through Willow Creek. Lucas Winters had been returning from a cattle drive when he first spotted the tornado. From his position on the ridge overlooking Willow Creek, he watched in horror as the massive funnel cloud descended upon the town he'd called home for the past 3 years. His horse, Thunder, snorted nervously beneath him, sensing the danger even from this distance. "Easy, boy," Lucas soothed, patting the stallion's neck while his eyes remained fixed on the destruction below. The tornado, a monstrous column of swirling darkness, carved a path directly through the heart of Willow Creek. Even from this distance, he could see buildings collapsing like they were made of paper instead of wood and stone. Lucas was no stranger to tornadoes. Growing up in Kansas, he'd seen his fair share of twisters, but this one seemed particularly vicious, particularly determined to leave nothing standing in its wake. His thoughts immediately went to the people in town, friends, acquaintances, and neighbors who might be trapped in the path of nature's fury. Without hesitation, Lucas urged Thunder forward, descending the ridge at a careful but rapid pace. The stallion responded to his master's urgency, finding sure footing despite the treacherous terrain. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, the tornado had moved on, leaving behind an eerie silence punctuated only by distant cries and the creaking of damaged structures. The destruction was even worse up close. The southern half of Willow Creek looked as though a giant hand had swept through it, tossing buildings aside like toys. Lucas dismounted, tying Thunder to a post that had somehow remained standing. The air was thick with dust and the smell of splintered wood and exposed earth. "Hello," Lucas called out, making his way carefully through the debris. "Anyone here need help?" A muffled cry answered him from somewhere to his right. Lucas turned toward the sound, scrambling over a pile of broken timber that had once been someone's home. He recognized the blue curtains tangled in the wreckage. This had been Eleanor Patterson's house, the quiet young woman who worked at the general store and always had a kind word for everyone. "Miss Patterson," Lucas called, his voice rising with concern. "Eleanor, are you in there?" Another moan, weaker this time, guided him to a section of collapsed wall. Lucas began lifting boards and broken furniture, tossing them aside with strength born of desperation. His hands were soon bleeding from splinters and nails, but he barely noticed the pain. Finally, he uncovered a pale hand, then an arm, and then Eleanor's face, covered in dust but miraculously intact. "Miss Patterson," he breathed, relief flooding through him as he saw her eyelids flutter. "Don't you worry now. I'm going to get you out of here." Eleanor's green eyes opened slowly, confusion evident in their depths. "Mr. Winters," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Call me Lucas," he said gently, continuing to clear debris from around her body. "I need to move these beams to get you out. Are you hurt badly?" Eleanor tried to assess her condition, wincing as pain shot through her left leg. "My leg," she managed, "and my head, everything else, I'm not sure." Lucas nodded, his expression grave but determined. "I'm going to have to lift you out. It might hurt, but we need to get you to the doctor." After carefully removing the remaining debris, Lucas slipped his arms beneath Eleanor's shoulders and knees. "Ready?" he asked, his blue eyes locked with hers. Eleanor nodded, bracing herself for pain. When Lucas lifted her, she bit her lip to keep from crying out, but couldn't stop a whimper from escaping. Against his broad chest, she felt simultaneously vulnerable and safe, a strange contradiction that her pain-addled mind couldn't quite process. Lucas carried Eleanor through the ruins of her home and back to where thunder waited patiently. The rest of the town was now coming alive with rescue efforts as those who had been spared the tornado's wrath emerged to help their less fortunate neighbors. "Lucas," Sheriff Miller called, running toward them. "Doc Parker's set up at the church. It wasn't hit too bad. Take her there." Lucas nodded, carefully mounting Thunder while holding Eleanor securely against him. She felt light in his arms, fragile as a bird with broken wings. The comparison struck him deeply. He'd always noticed Eleanor's quiet strength around town, the way she carried herself with dignity despite the whispers about her past. Seeing her so wounded stirred something protective within him that surprised him with its intensity. The church had indeed been spared the worst of the tornado's fury. Its steeple was gone, and many windows were shattered, but the structure stood firm. Inside, pews had been pushed aside to make room for the injured. Doc Parker moved efficiently between makeshift beds, his white beard speckled with blood and his usually immaculate shirt stained and rumpled. "Another one, Lucas," the doctor called when he spotted them. "Bring her over here." Lucas carried Eleanor to an empty pallet and gently laid her down. She winced as her injured leg made contact with the floor, and Lucas found himself reluctant to release her hand once she was settled. "I found her in what's left of her house," he explained to the doctor. "She was buried under part of the roof, I think. Says her leg and head hurt the worst." Doc Parker nodded, already examining Eleanor's pupils. "You did right bringing her here quick. Head injuries can be tricky." He turned to Eleanor with a kind smile. "Miss Patterson, I'm going to need to check that leg now. It might hurt a bit." Eleanor nodded bravely, her eyes finding Lucas's again. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding me." Lucas squeezed her hand. "I'll come back to check on you," he promised, reluctantly backing away so the doctor could work. "There are others who might need help." For the next several hours, Lucas joined the rescue efforts. digging through collapsed buildings and helping to carry the injured to safety. Thankfully, most of Willow Creek's residents had managed to take shelter before the tornado hit, and while property damage was extensive, the loss of life was mercifully limited. As dusk fell, Lucas returned to the church, his body aching from exertion but his mind still too alert to rest. He found Eleanor awake, her legs splinted and her head bandaged. She looked pale against the dark blanket someone had placed over her, but her eyes brightened when she saw him approach. "You came back," she said softly. Lucas knelt beside her pallet. "I said I would." He noticed a cup of water nearby and helped her take a sip. "How are you feeling?" "Like I fought a tornado and lost," Eleanor replied with a weak smile that transformed her face, making Lucas realize just how beautiful she was, even covered in dust and bandages. "Doc says my leg is broken, but it's a clean break. Should heal well if I stay off it." Lucas nodded, relieved. "And your head?" "Just a nasty bump. I was lucky." Her expression sobered. "My house?" Lucas hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "It's gone, Miss Patterson, not much left standing." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, absorbing this news. When she opened them again, they glistened with unshed tears, but her voice remained steady. "Please call me Eleanor, and thank you for telling me the truth." "Eleanor," Lucas said, testing the name on his tongue and finding he liked the sound of it. "I'm sorry about your home," she nodded, a single tear escaping despite her efforts. "It was just a house," she said, though her voice betrayed her. "At least I'm alive to rebuild." Lucas impulsively reached out to wipe away her tear with his thumb, the gesture more intimate than he'd intended. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a spark of connection that transcended their previous casual acquaintance. "Where will you go once Doc says you can leave?" Lucas asked, suddenly concerned about her future. Eleanor's brave facade faltered slightly. I don't know. Mrs. Whittaker might take me in if her house survived, or perhaps the boarding house if I can afford it." Lucas made a decision then, words leaving his mouth before he could reconsider. "I have a small ranch just outside town. Nothing fancy, but the house is solid, and there's a spare room. You'd be welcome to stay there while you recover and figure things out." Eleanor's eyes widened. "That's very generous, Mr. Winters Lucas, but I couldn't impose like that." "It's no imposition," he insisted. "It's not right for you to be alone while you're healing, and I've got plenty of space." Before Eleanor could respond, Doc Parker approached, looking exhausted but satisfied with his day's work. "Miss Patterson needs rest now, Lucas. You can continue your conversation tomorrow." Lucas nodded, standing reluctantly. "Think about my offer," he said to Eleanor. "I'll come by in the morning." As he walked out into the night, Lucas wondered at his own impulsiveness. He'd always been the solitary type, preferring the company of his cattle and horses to most people. Yet something about Eleanor, perhaps her quiet dignity or the vulnerability he'd witnessed today, had stirred feelings he'd thought long dormant. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the previous day's violence. Lucas arrived at the church early, after spending the night helping to organize relief efforts. He found Eleanor awake, sitting up against the wall with Doc Parker examining her leg. "Healing nicely already," the doctor was saying. "But you'll need to stay off it completely for at least 2 weeks, then use crutches for another month or so." Eleanor nodded, her face a study in determination. "When can I leave here, Doc? You must need the space for others who are worse off." "Today, if you have somewhere to go," Doc Parker replied, glancing up as he noticed Lucas. "Ah, and here's your knight in dusty chaps now." Eleanor blushed slightly, meeting Lucas's gaze. "Good morning." "Morning," Lucas responded, suddenly feeling awkward under the doctor's knowing look. "Have you thought about my offer?" Eleanor bit her lip, hesitating. It's very kind, but I'm concerned about propriety. A single woman staying at a bachelor's home. Doc Parker chuckled. In normal times, I'd agree with you, Miss Patterson, but these aren't normal times. Half the town is gone, and people are doubling up wherever there's shelter. Besides, Lucas here is known to be an honorable man. Lucas felt his own cheeks warm at the doctor's endorsement. I promise you'll have your privacy and respect, Eleanor. It's just until you're back on your feet. After another moment's consideration, Eleanor nodded. All right. Thank you, Lucas. I accept your offer. By midday, Lucas had arranged a wagon with enough padding to make Eleanor's journey as comfortable as possible. The town was still in chaos, with people sifting through rubble for salvageable possessions and beginning the long process of rebuilding. Lucas helped Eleanor search through what remained of her home, recovering a few precious items: a family Bible, a silver hairbrush that had belonged to her mother, and a small box of jewelry that had somehow survived intact. Not much to show for a life, Eleanor said softly as Lucas placed the items in a crate beside her in the wagon. Things can be replaced, Lucas replied, his voice gentle. You can't. The journey to Lucas's ranch took just under an hour, the wagon moving slowly to avoid jostling Eleanor's injured leg. As they approached, Eleanor got her first good look at what would be her temporary home. The ranch house was modest but well-maintained, with a wide porch and sturdy construction. A barn stood nearby, along with a corral where several horses grazed peacefully. It's lovely, Eleanor said sincerely as Lucas brought the wagon to a stop. It's not much, but it's home, Lucas replied, pleased by her approval. Wait here while I get things ready inside. While Lucas disappeared into the house, Eleanor took in her surroundings. The ranch sat in a small valley, protected on three sides by gentle hills. A creek ran nearby, its waters sparkling in the afternoon sun. In the distance, she could see cattle grazing contentedly, seemingly unaware of the destruction that had occurred just miles away. Lucas returned a few minutes later. Ready? He asked, reaching up to help her down. Eleanor nodded, allowing him to lift her from the wagon as effortlessly as he had from the rubble of her home. Being in his arms again brought back the confusing mix of vulnerability and security she'd felt before, intensified now by her awareness of their unusual arrangement. The inside of the house was simple but comfortable, with sturdy furniture and surprisingly homey touches: a quilt over the back of a chair, books stacked on a side table, a vase of wildflowers on the kitchen table. Lucas carried her to a small bedroom off the main living area. This will be your room, he said, placing her gently on the bed. Bathroom's just across the hall. I'm down at the other end, so you'll have plenty of privacy. Eleanor looked around at the clean, plain room. Thank you, Lucas. I don't know what I would have done without your kindness. Lucas shifted uncomfortably under her grateful gaze. Anyone would have done the same. No, Eleanor said firmly. Not anyone, and I won't forget it. The first few days of their arrangement were marked by awkwardness as they established a routine. Lucas helped Eleanor move around the house when necessary, prepared simple meals, and tended to his ranch duties. Eleanor, unused to being idle, found herself frustrated by her limitations but grateful for Lucas's patient assistance. On the fourth evening, as they shared a supper of beef stew and cornbread, Eleanor decided to break the polite silence that had characterized most of their meals. Tell me about yourself, Lucas, she said. I've been living in your home for days, and I realize I know very little about you. Lucas looked surprised by the question, as if unused to talking about himself. Not much to tell. Came to Texas from Kansas about 3 years ago. Bought this place when old man Jenkins decided to move east to be with his daughter. Been running cattle ever since. Family, Eleanor pressed gently. A shadow crossed Lucas's face. Lost my parents to cholera when I was 18. No siblings. Been on my own since then. Eleanor nodded, understanding his solitary nature better now. I lost my parents too. Father in the war, mother to pneumonia 2 winters later. I was 20 when she passed. Is that when you came to Willow Creek? Lucas asked, seeming genuinely interested. Eleanor hesitated, then decided on honesty. No, I came a year ago after leaving a difficult situation in San Antonio. Lucas's eyes sharpened with interest, but he didn't push. Fresh starts are good sometimes. Yes, Eleanor agreed softly. They are. As the days turned into weeks, the initial awkwardness between them gradually gave way to a comfortable companionship. Eleanor began to help around the house as much as her injury allowed, insisting on contributing to their shared living arrangement. She discovered she enjoyed cooking for someone who appreciated her efforts, and Lucas found himself looking forward to returning to the house at the end of each day. They fell into a pattern of sharing stories in the evenings. Lucas told Eleanor about his dreams for the ranch, how he hoped to expand his herd and perhaps build a larger house someday. Eleanor shared her own aspirations of perhaps opening a small dressmaking shop, revealing a talent for sewing that had been her mother's legacy. One evening, about 3 weeks after the tornado, Lucas returned from town with news and supplies. "Rebuilding's coming along," he reported as he unloaded packages on the kitchen table. Marshals organized work crews, and the railroad sent lumber. General stores operating out of a tent for now. Eleanor nodded, a twinge of guilt passing through her. "I should be there helping." "You will be when you're healed," Lucas assured her. "Oh, I ran into Mrs. Whittaker. She salvaged some of your things." He handed Eleanor a small bundle. Inside, Eleanor found several dresses that Mrs. Whittaker must have taken in to wash before the tornado hit. The familiar fabrics brought tears to her eyes. "I've been wearing your dead mother's dresses for weeks," she said softly. "I was beginning to forget what my own clothes felt like." Lucas watched her, his expression softening. "They look better on you than sitting in a trunk," he said. "Mother would have liked that they were being used." Their eyes met across the table, and Eleanor felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. Lucas quickly looked away, clearing his throat. "Almost forgot," he said, reaching into his pocket. "Doc Parker sent this. Says you can start using crutches now if you're careful." Eleanor's face lit up. "Really? Oh, that's wonderful news." The crutches gave Eleanor a new sense of independence, allowing her to move around the house without Lucas's assistance. Yet strangely, they both found they missed the moments when he would carry her from room to room or help her to the porch to enjoy the evening air. One afternoon, about a month after the tornado, Eleanor was sitting on the porch when a wagon approached the ranch. She recognized Mrs. Whittaker and waved as the elderly woman drew closer. "Eleanor, dear," Mrs. Whittaker called as Lucas emerged from the barn to help her down. "How wonderful to see you looking so well." "It's good to see you too," Eleanor replied warmly. "How are things in town?" As Mrs. Whittaker settled on the porch with a glass of lemonade Eleanor had prepared, she provided a detailed account of Willow Creek's recovery efforts. "The boarding house is almost rebuilt," she concluded. "Sarah Jenkins says she'll have rooms available by next week." Eleanor felt a strange pang at this news. That's good to hear." Mrs. Whittaker glanced between Eleanor and Lucas, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "Of course, there's no rush for you to return, dear. You seem to be recovering nicely here." After Mrs. Whittaker departed, a strange tension hung in the air between Eleanor and Lucas. The mention of the boarding house had made them both aware that their current arrangement had always been temporary, a fact they'd somehow managed to forget in the comfortable routine they'd established. That evening, As they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lucas finally broke the silence. "Mrs. Whittaker says the boarding house will be ready soon." Eleanor nodded, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "Yes, you don't have to go," Lucas said abruptly, then looked surprised at his own words. Eleanor turned to him, her heart suddenly racing. "What do you mean?" Lucas stood and moved to the porch railing, his back to her as he gathered his thoughts. When he turned around, his expression was more vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. "I mean, I've gotten used to having you here, Eleanor. The house was just a place before. Now it feels like a home." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "Lucas, I know it's fast," he continued, words tumbling out now. "We've only really known each other a month, but I feel like I've been waiting for you without knowing it, finding you in that rubble. It was like finding a part of myself I didn't know was missing." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "I've felt it too," she admitted softly. "But I wasn't sure if it was just gratitude, or if you could ever see me as more than someone who needed your help." Lucas knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I see you, Eleanor Patterson. I see your strength, your kindness, your determination, and I'd like to keep seeing you every day if you'll let me." Eleanor smiled through her tears. "I'd like that too." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a promise of things to come rather than a passionate declaration. When they parted, both were smiling, the tension of the past days dissolved in the simple acknowledgement of their feelings. As summer turned to fall, Eleanor's leg healed completely, though Doc Parker warned she might always have a slight limp in damp weather. She began riding into town regularly to help with the continuing rebuilding efforts, discovering a talent for organization that made her an invaluable member of the recovery committee. Lucas expanded his cattle operation, hiring 2 young cowboys to help manage the growing herd. The extra hands gave him more time to court Eleanor properly, with Sunday rides and picnics by the creek that ran through his property. In October, as the leaves began to change, Lucas took Eleanor to a special spot on his land, a small hill overlooking the valley, where wildflowers still bloomed despite the approaching winter. "I've been thinking," he said as they spread a blanket on the ground. "This would be a good spot for a house." Eleanor looked around, admiring the view. "It's beautiful. Are you planning to build a new home?" "Maybe," Lucas replied, suddenly seeming nervous. "If you'd like it." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat as she registered his meaning. "Lucas." He took her hands, his blue eyes earnest and hopeful. "Eleanor Patterson, these past months have been the happiest of my life. Finding you in that tornado's aftermath was the luckiest day I'll ever know. I love you, and I want to build a life with you, a home, a family, everything." Tears of joy sprang to Eleanor's eyes as Lucas reached into his pocket and withdrew a small gold ring with a modest diamond. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice husky with emotion. "Yes," Eleanor whispered, then louder. "Yes, Lucas Winters, I will marry you." The ring slid perfectly onto her finger, as if it had been made for her. Their kiss sealed the promise, and as they held each other on the hilltop, Eleanor marveled at how the greatest tragedy of her life had led to her greatest joy. They were married in December, in the newly rebuilt church of Willow Creek. The whole town attended, everyone having witnessed the unusual beginning of their romance. Mrs. Whittaker cried happy tears, and even Sheriff Miller looked suspiciously misty-eyed during the ceremony. Spring brought construction on their new home, built on the hilltop Lucas had shown Eleanor. By summer, it was complete, larger than the original ranch house, with plenty of room for the family they both hoped to have. On the first anniversary of the tornado, Eleanor stood on the porch of their new home, watching the sunset with Lucas's arms wrapped around her waist, his hands resting gently on the slight swell of her belly where their first child grew. "It's strange," she mused, leaning back against him. "A year ago today, I thought I'd lost everything." Lucas pressed a kiss to her temple. "And now," Eleanor turned in his arms, her eyes shining with love, "now I know I found everything that truly matters." As twilight deepened over their ranch, Eleanor reflected on the twisted path that had brought her here. The tornado had torn through Willow Creek, destroying homes and lives in its wake. But from that destruction had emerged something beautiful, a love strong enough to weather any storm that might come their way. Later that night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Lucas placed his hand over Eleanor's growing belly, feeling the slight flutter of their child's movements. "I never thought I'd have this," he confessed softly. "A wife, a child on the way, a real family." Eleanor covered his hand with her own. "Neither did I. After everything that happened in San Antonio, I'd given up on finding someone who would love me for who I am." "Someday you'll tell me the whole story," Lucas said, not pushing but letting her know he was ready to hear it whenever she was ready to share. "Someday," Eleanor agreed. "But it doesn't matter anymore. That was a different life. This is where I belong." Their lips met in a tender kiss that spoke of promises kept and dreams fulfilled. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, nourishing the land that was their home and washing away the last lingering memories of the destruction that had brought them together. In the years that followed, Willow Creek rebuilt and expanded. Growing from the small frontier town, it had been into a thriving community. The Winters Ranch prospered, and Eleanor eventually opened her dressmaking shop in town, operating it 3 days a week while raising their growing family. Their firstborn, a son they named Thomas after Lucas's father, was joined 2 years later by a daughter, Mary, named for Eleanor's mother. The children grew strong and healthy, riding horses almost before they could walk, their laughter filling the home that had been built with so much love. On quiet evenings, Lucas and Eleanor would often sit on their porch, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set over their land. Sometimes they would speak of the tornado and how it had brought them together, marveling at how something so destructive could ultimately lead to such happiness. And if the skies occasionally darkened and the wind picked up, Eleanor would feel Lucas's hand tighten around hers, not in fear, but in remembrance and gratitude for the storm that had swept her into the arms of the man who had carried her from the rubble, and into a life more beautiful than she had ever dared to dream.